Anybody? I don't see any participants. This is one person.
But there are, there's like 9
thank you all
Is
so
any of them
much
yet?
for
Right.
You're gonna get one
either
from the
zooming in
So
or
maybe they'll
coming
pop
in
up on the
in person.
because it's on. I mean, everything's on.
Meeting, they really try to
Usually
have
there's a line up here, but
Yeah.
panel.
So when we did
We are
gallery,
very pleased to have everybody here.
it did
We are gonna be learning more
I
about
just wouldn't show
early childhood
I mean-
education initiatives. And
gallery typically would show.
we are gonna.
You would
also
think.
be taking a look at the draft copy of the blue ribbon panel outline, which
they're
is
all here.
very exciting.
They're all muted.
We are
Oh, even their cameras are off.
opportunity To be discussing that. And I'm not gonna bust
Try to
any,
get somebody.
longer
You
from
call
the
on the phone.
agenda, so I'm gonna go ahead and turn over the meeting to
See the.
our amazing early childhood commissioner, Beth Bai, and I just want to say, because some of you may not know this, we are one of the few states in the country that recognizes the value of early childhood education, and that's why we actually have a commissioner in charge of that very important area. So our great commissioner, Beth Bai.
Thank you, Madam Lieutenant Governor. Our tireless Lieutenant Governor, we were talking about this over the weekend.
Yes, we were.
And really appreciate your support of this Blue Ribbon Panel process, and you update the governor often about what you're seeing out there in early childhood with our visits, and I really appreciate that. Okay, well, welcome everybody. We're glad you're here today. What we're ironing out is the meeting is working and people can see us and hear us, but we can't see the people who have joined us online, and we want to see your beautiful faces, especially when we get to the feedback part of the meeting. So just to give people a preview, what we're going to do is, Nicole, please hold 1 second.
If we can just have someone that's on the Zoom call just to test out, if you can just come up of mute to speak. So I don't know if like Commissioner Durantes, if you could come off mute and say something so we can test out if we are able to see you.
Let's see. If you're online, can you either raise your hand or say hello if you can hear us?
Hello, we could hear you guys.
All right. Okay, so it's working.
Awesome. So I think it's in speaker mode so that when it's in speaker mode, then who's ever speaking comes up. So first things, Kristen is going to call membership, but before we do that, I wanted to make sure that Karen Pulaski introduces a new member for us, who is our Head Start Collab Governor of Safety. Pulaski. I'm so sorry, Karen Pascal.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yes, I'm happy to introduce you to Marcia Guthrie. Marcia is the Early Head Start Director at Stanford, and she also serves as the co-chair of the Head Start Association, and she is the new representative for Head Start.
Wow, thank you for making the trip today. And we really do value those who are here in person and also those who are here online. The hybrid format really allows us to hear from all voices, which we want to do today. Okay, so next I'm going to ask Kristen to please call the roll. And if you're online, please come off mute and say here so we know you're here.
Madam Lieutenant Governor.
Here.
Commissioner Bai.
Here.
Holly Williams.
Here.
Commissioner Barton Reeves. We have Bridget Aliaga on behalf of Shelley Nolan.
Here.
Commissioner Durantes.
I'm here.
Dr. Shante Hanks.
Here.
Commissioner Chef. Commissioner Russell Tucker. Mark Marco. Leslie Mara. Karen Pascal. Here. Steven Hernandez. Julie Jaconi. Here. Brian Klimkowitz.
Sounds like he's online.
Louis Calarito.
Louis isn't even there.
Is that a representative for Louis that just spoke up? Okay.
Marlene Paternock. Ava Bermudez.
Present.
Elliot Brenner. Patricia Bryant Fosile. Karen Rainville. Here. Edie Reichard. Caroline Austin. Kimberly Oliver. Kathy Batista.
Here.
Ruth Ann Bucknor.
Here.
And Keo Bennett Bruyan.
Thank you, Kristen, for that. Oh, one more.
And for the first time, Marcia Guthrie. Here.
Great. Well, we're glad you're all here. All of you who can make it. It's certainly a busy time of year for all agencies. And Commissioner Durantes, you one of the most enthusiastic here, I think. It's great to have you with us. All right. So what I wanted to mention as we, approval of the minutes. Let me get to that. So the minutes were posted on the website, and for new members, you'll know that they're always posted on the website after meetings. On the OEC website, under partnerships, you'll see the early childhood cabinet. I'm going to give folks just a couple minutes to go to the website. Some are online and some are here. It looks like virtually everyone has a phone or a computer to look those up and review them before we vote. Just because they weren't emailed out, I'd like to give a moment to review the main minutes. And they're also in the chat, if that makes it easier for you to go to the website. So we'll take 2 minutes to review them, and then I'll have to vote.
Oh, I got it. It wasn't. Oh. Oh, so it was that the sudden was changed. Okay.
Okay, have folks had time? Do they need more time? Just raise your hand if you need more time. Okay, so we'll take a vote on approving the minutes. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, minutes passed. Now we're going to move on to our blue ribbon panel, and I think the cabinet needs to take particular note here because one of the next steps for the blue ribbon panel is that there will be a report that will be brought to the governor in December, making recommendations about a 5-year strategic plan for childcare for Connecticut. But when the panel's done, the cabinet is asked to act in an advisory capacity as we move those recommendations forward. And the cabinet seemed like a logical choice because of the appointments and the approval process, and it represents multiple agencies. And for Governor Lamont and Lieutenant Governor Bysowitz, cross-agency collaboration is super important. So as we know that plan for childcare that moves our state forward also helps our other agencies, and we can't do it without our other agencies. So I think the cabinet needs to take particular interest here as we go through the recommendations to date. And so the process will be, we're going to go through 2 of the priority areas for recommendations for the Blue Ribbon panel. And then we're going to stop and have a 25-minute conversation with cabinet members. If we finish faster, that's okay too. But just to give a chance for feedback, and this is, we have multiple public sharing sessions. This is really geared toward cabinet members. So that's who we're going to hear from. And then we'll present the other 2 priority areas and have another conversation after that. Questions, what works, what doesn't work, what's missing, because you all bring different perspectives. But we're super excited about where we are. I think I met with the governor this week and he said, how long has this been going on? And in the total, it will be a 10-month process. Vermont just finished a 10-year process in which they made recommendations about childcare and sort of passed universal childcare, but that took 10 years. So Governor Lamont and Lieutenant Governor Vice, which you're not known for going slowly or tolerating too much bureaucratic process. So we are now about 8 months in, and the process has been that the OEC team developed some core recommendations. We went out, had hearings, probably 5 or 6 hearings to date, a couple of panel meetings, and now we're to a point where we feel like we have a really strong framework of recommendations based on that feedback. Now, this week, we're calling it the week. We have, I think altogether 9 meetings, public hearings. We were in Waterbury last night. We were in Bridgeport Monday morning. We'll be in Norwich this afternoon. There was a parent meeting. I think we had 30 or 40 parents on Monday night giving parent perspective. And so it goes. And tonight we have a Zoom meeting in Spanish to make sure that the recommendations are accessible. So this has been a very transparent process. And I'm looking around the room, and many of you have already had feedback, but I think you'll see that the recommendations are now taking a slightly different form. And the panel's going to have to make choices and recommendations and prioritize. So we can't do everything. So we've got to figure out what we can do and where we get the most sort of bang for our buck, and how do we keep the children and families at the center? I think that's sort of the key. Keeping children and families at the center and what children need. So we're going to walk through that PowerPoint now, and you'll see that it's taking a slightly different format. Oh, Ava, come on up to the table. We have your name tag and everything. Okay, next slide, please. People at home, can you hear okay? And can you see okay? Everything working for you?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, so we're going to give a little context and we'll provide the outline and talk through what happens next. Okay, next slide. Okay, so this panel was called by Governor Lamont for us to inform a data-informed 5-year strategic plan for childcare. There are about 23 panel members from all different sectors of the state. The governor thought it was important that business be at the table, that early childhood educators be at the table, that higher ed be at the table, and some community advocates at the table. And we also have public school superintendents represented. So it's a wide range of folks, making sure we have different perspectives. Okay, next slide. This just shows the process. It's a little hard to read, but you can see this sort of just shows all the stakeholders who've had input in the process, and where we are now, which is sort of gearing toward the final recommendations and at the intense phase of feedback. Okay, next slide. I'm really hoping I can read the next slide from over here. Otherwise, I'll just move my chair. Okay, we have 5 pillars. Can you shrink the others who are here? Okay, so we have 5 pillars that are behind this plan. One is equity. We know that right now there is not equitable access to childcare in Connecticut. And this plan is gonna be grounded in equity. The other piece is, we know that early childhood is a good investment and that it saves dollars in the long run, but only if it's high quality care. It can't just be anything. And so the panel is saying this is grounded in high quality. Next is that there is affordable access. Thank you, Elise. I'm old. That there is affordable access for families. And right now, childcare is just not affordable for most families in Connecticut. The other piece that there's been a lot of articles in the news lately is that September 30th is the end of the stabilization funds for childcare across this country that has kept programs open. And we know that providers face instability without those funds. And this is true across the country. There's even an article in New York Times that middle and upper middle class families in New York City cannot afford childcare. So this is a problem that affects families who have a lot of resource challenges.
Yeah, it'll be a change.
With
Yeah.
resources in Connecticut,
Yeah, but it's-
particularly in toddler care.
Really?
And the other piece that is, it's gonna be super important going forward is that there is family and community voice, that the system is designed to take community input with a community-based process. In Connecticut, that's mostly at the local level, but also that family voice is not lost in this process. So that's a key pillar. Okay, next. And here's where I'm gonna use my notes. This is the overarching vision, and we really like this picture because I do think it symbolizes what the Blue Ribbon panel is working toward, keeping the child and family at the center, who live in the context of a community, who are attending an early childhood program, and then you have state and federal resources that all surround that child, and that the system is coordinated. Right now, if you were to lay out the system, it would not look this beautiful because it's very hard for families to navigate. And basically, on average, children are not getting the high quality care that they need because it's just not accessible. So the goal is that all families will have access to equitable, high quality, affordable early childhood. That this will be implemented over 5 years, and I do think it's important to set those expectations that this cannot happen overnight. Even if we wanted it to, it would disrupt the market. For example, the governor approved a budget with an 11% increase after negotiations with the union, 11% increase a year for 3 years in our Care for Kids rates. If we did 33% in 1 year, it would drive up the cost of childcare 33% in 1 year for families who are not on Care for Kids. It's a complicated, I won't go into the details, but that this has to be staged in a way that gives time for the systems to adapt, for the fiscal planning, and for families. So it is a 5-year plan, and I said when I started that there will be there are going to be trade-offs and decisions to be made, and one of our guiding principles will be to start in historically under-resourced communities and with historically under-resourced groups. And then also, as we move toward improved teacher credentialing and supports for teacher development, that we honor our existing workforce, that we don't do things that drive out the mostly women who have been doing this important work in Connecticut, and we sort of wrap our arms around them and build a system that supports their development and good practice. And then we know that high quality early childhood system benefits Connecticut's economy. Christy Pentima from CBIA was at a meeting with us in Waterford, meeting with business leaders in Eastern Connecticut, and talked about the 100,000 worker shortage in Connecticut that we have. There are 100,000 workers short in Connecticut. And he explained that if families had easy access to childcare and women participated equally in the workforce as men, that we would have 120,000 additional workers in Connecticut. So this is about the child, and every child having the best start in the best program possible, but it's also about the Connecticut economy. And according to Ready Nation, Connecticut is losing $1.2 billion in tax revenue productivity because of the infant toddler shortage right now. So it's not like there's no cost to not doing this. And I think that's why the governor convened this blue ribbon panel. And just hold on 1 minute, because we're getting blood warning. Please hold. Why didn't we do this on Zoom? I'm just kidding. Yeah. And we're gonna have to raise children who can deal with global warming and be adaptable to all the weather changes. I mean, just think about what kids and families are dealing with around the world right now. Resilience is key, and we know that early childhood is important there. So we do know that this makes a difference, and this is our lieutenant governor has been such a champion here about for women and women in the workforce. And paid leave has been a tremendous help there. But having high quality early childhood education will as well. So the next thing we did was break down these goals into who's benefiting from what. So the panel plan and the 5-year plan for childcare will benefit families, providers, and communities. Families, as we said, will have access to childcare. We will improve our information systems, because right now we don't have a really good way for families to have sort of a single point of entry and know what their options are. And the families will get support to really lead in their communities and help develop the system. For providers, we think the number one item for providers that's come through across this plan is that if we don't take care of the compensation issue and the workforce compensation issue, nothing else will fall into place. But that is the crisis that the field is facing right now. So there need to be more funding and resources for providers, better access to things like health insurance. We need to make our state systems simpler for providers so they spend more time supporting their staff and coaching and less time on our data systems and in our technology systems. And then we know that facility fundings can help address some unmet needs. When I met with the governor this week, he really wants us to have the panel think hard about adapting extra spaces in communities, like there's sometimes extra spaces in schools. Some of our community colleges have extra spaces. And he wants to really leverage accessible state and local spaces versus build everything new. And I thought that was a really good, when I updated him with this plan. So as we look at facilities funding, thinking of them for adapted spaces versus brand new. And then for communities, we know that if we can get from communities timely, updated needs assessment and information, we can improve the system and have real-time data. Right now, when we're planning a system, we use census data. You know, we do our best to estimate, but some states have systems where parents have it, like South Carolina, a single point of entry. So the state knows exactly what parents are looking for. This many parents are looking for 3-day-a-week infant toddler care. This many parents are looking for full-time, full year. These parents are looking for public preschool. And that is informing, they're building their system based on what parents are actually saying they need. Our system is built in the 1990s based on 10 hours a day, 50 weeks a year. And we know that parents' workforce needs to change. I left my little granddaughter Ivy this morning with my wife, who is child care for the month of September. But I know it was so, I have a great picture, I'll put it up for you. I left them reading on the floor. She's 3 months old. Yes, we're gonna be, she's gonna have a little book report on Chicka Chicka Boom Boom, maybe. But what I wanted to say is they really wanted 3 or 4 day a week care full time. And they couldn't find it. And so they have to pay for 5 day a week, even though they're only going to use 4 day a week, because grandma's not passing up 1 day a week. I know Tracy is going to be doing that. You just all have to stop me from retiring. It was very hard to leave today. So I'm just saying the system is built based on the 90s and things have really changed. And if some families might prefer a 3 day a week, but our state system doesn't allow it. And I always found as a director, it made me angry that a suburban family in my program could choose 3 days a week, full day. But if I had a family on school readiness, I had to tell the parents, sorry, this, you have to come 5 days, and they'll check my timesheets that you were here at least 8 hours a day. And so we've adapted those some, Lieutenant Governor, but we can do better to build communities. We can do better understanding from communities what their needs are and funding those needs. And perhaps the state dollars will go further if a spot was split between 2 families, right? Instead of insisting on a full day, full year. Yeah, it does seem like the no-brainer, but it takes a while to get there with the system. And there is certainly every full day, full year spot the state of Connecticut has a family that needs full day, full year care, because it's not like we have enough spaces. But we do need to build a more flexible system. Okay, next. So for those of you who've been following along, you'll note that the sort of 4 goal areas have changed a bit based on that feedback. So now we have 4 goal areas: the workforce, equitable access, family and community voice, and systems and funding. And I have a feeling after the week of hearings that these are going to shift a bit still. But that's what a plan. We found this during COVID. We put out a plan to the field and say, here's what we're going to do. And they would say, what? Don't do that. And then we go back and adapt, and the back and forth really made us better. And that's true here too. Okay, next one. Okay, here's where we get to the meat of the matter. And I'm sorry for those of you who can't read. Is there a way to send this to folks who have computers? Yeah, why don't you put it in the chat in case, because I'm sure if I'm having trouble reading it, you're having trouble reading it. Last night in Waterbury, we had a screen that was 5 times this size. It was huge. So I can sort of, because I'm knowing that those online can read, but not everyone in the room can read, I'll just read the goal and then summarize the objectives. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go through objective 1A through D, and then we'll have a second, I think it's access. We'll do a second goal, and then we're going to stop, and then we're just going to take your questions and feedback. So for workforce, I've said this, the real primary thing that we're focused on is retaining and recruiting professional, high quality early childhood staff. And, you know, that really boils down to compensation at a level. But I will say, those of you in my group last night, there was a provider from New Haven that really got to me. Because she's come to a couple of these things and she's been online, and she said, I'm really tired of sounding like, how can we possibly attract people to this field? This is a great field. I love what I do. And so the panel needs to really say that out loud, that this is a great profession. And she really got to me, because I'm always like, we need to pay more, we need better pipelines. And she's like, whoa, I'm here. I love my job. I love my career. And so I think that we're really going to take that to heart. That I think part of this workforce recommendation has to be reminding people that this is a great field. I know I would never go to another field. I love my career in this field. So I think we need to lean on that. I just wanted to say that today, because that was really hit me last night. But doesn't mean no matter how great, if you don't pay people and they can't live on the wages, you know, it doesn't matter. So compensation's at the center. We really want to innovate around worker recruitment with apprenticeship, high school, child development associates, and having systems that make it easier for people to retrain from other fields. Because a lot of times people go into business and then they go, oh, I can't do this. I want to teach, or I want to work in early childhood. Objective 1C is to adopt a 3-step career ladder. Right now, Connecticut has a 15-step career ladder. To really simplify this, to join sort of a national movement toward a unifying framework so people's credentials are portable across state lines, and that if someone puts in that work, they have a license and it has a value and it moves with them, but it's a less complicated path to getting that. And I'm looking at Renee from SDE, and aligning that with SDE's early childhood credentials is really important. And then create and expand strategies to support early childhood educators to support the quality. Any parent in this room knows that the quality of their child's classroom, whether preschool or high school, has a whole lot to do with the skills of that teacher. And I would say leadership and building. Those 2 things are what it's about. And so we need to support teachers in their instruction and help them improve their quality. Okay, and then access, for access, our goal is to expand affordable access. The first one is a significant goal, and one that this has been going on in a lot of states, is to expand affordability for low and middle income families, committing to getting to 100% of state median income over 3 years, and work toward a parent copay level of 7%, which, you know, according to Julie to my left, you know, the feds are going to require parent copays of 7% anyway, so we may as well put it in our plan. One thing that we've learned with the data, and we'll be sharing some of the specific data with the panel, but we don't have it in its final form today, is that in Connecticut, we're doing a pretty good job for families less than 50% of state median income. When you put together state-funded child daycare, school readiness, and care for kids, we're reaching a large percentage of families who qualify for care for kids. But when you get to families that make between $50,000 and $100,000 a year, there's very little access to supports, and families just can't afford to spend a third of their income on childcare. So either a parent stays home, or they put a child somewhere where they'd rather put them somewhere else, but they can't afford that. Or providers are taking less compensation, so the parents send the child there at a reduced rate. So it's not a good situation right now. So we also want to increase equitable access to high quality programs. We know, we had a conversation yesterday around the shortage of infant toddler care. We know that families of children with special needs are not able to access care in a way that helps their child, especially after they turn 3, access the services they need and work, because a lot of the public school programs are part-day, part-year. So looking for ways to address that, and then facility funding to also increase equitable access. So I'm going to stop there. Those are the first 2 goals. And just open it up. Can you go to the next slide with the questions? So what makes sense to you? What resonates with you? Why don't we start with that question? And just a reminder, because some people have walked in the room, this is the time for cabinet members, and we have public.
I'll just say on the facilities aspect, I so agree with the governor. We visited an elementary school in Glastonbury that the town was not using. And the town was hearing a need for early child spots. And so they decided to convert this 1-floor elementary school to turn it into a place for infants to toddlers. And it was incredible. And they did it in like 6 or 8 weeks. It was just incredible. So because, and again, this depends on your town or your city. In the cities, we're seeing increases in the number of babies being born. In the suburbs, not as much, but there are a lot of municipal buildings out there, especially schools, that could be repurposed. So I just love this. And I just think we should think about CHIFA funding for, that's the quasi-public that helps build college and educational space. And why not think about using them to work with municipalities, and also to work with maybe private entities that want to provide on site, or nonprofits.
Thank you, Madam Governor. The CHIFA point came up this week already, and there was a program in the 90s where child care programs could access CHIFA funds to build. So that's something that the panel should have before them to understand how that works. There's a hand up. I can't see who it is. Commissioner Durantes, good morning.
Good morning. I just would want to lift up that everywhere where we mention quality childcare, it's a point that you've raised often, Commissioner Bai, and that is safe childcare. That oftentimes we've seen a spike in unsafe situations related to folks that parents are forced to leave their children with if they have to go to work or appointments, and that we've seen a direct correlation in the investigation of unsafe situations. So every time we mention quality, just like we can't say equity enough, I think the word safe should also go with it. And the other piece is that I just wanted to, I thought it was a good opportunity to talk about the collaboration we have related to foster parents and care for kids between DCF and OEC to make sure that that subgroup of caregivers also has access to that type of funding.
Thank you, Commissioner Durantes. You know, you're channeling the parents, because one of the things coming out of the parent meetings that we're hearing, and we're getting a full report from the Funders Collaborative, is that parents are talking about safety first, and that is not a word that we've used here, but that is a term and an idea and a really critical piece for families. And then when things aren't safe, Commissioner Durante's team and my team end up investigating and going into programs together. And it's, you know, it's not a good situation, you know, but we have a great partnership in that way. And then really kudos to Commissioner Durante's team, and I know Kristen and Julie who are here, and OPM, Holly's here too. It was pretty complicated figuring out how to have childcare providers not have to go to both DCF and OEC when they're being reimbursed for childcare. So we're just launching a system after some good advocacy out there on the part of providers that doesn't matter what agency's paying you, you can go through the Care for Kids system. And so that's been good for families and good for providers, complicated behind the scenes, but worth the effort. So thank you for mentioning that. And that, I think, you know, Commissioner Durantes, maybe in terms of the equity and access, we probably should put foster parents, because they still face challenges, even though we've made this improvement, but that is a challenge I'm sure that your folks are seeing that we have not recognized here.
It is, thank you. I think it's the temporary nature of the children that are in their homes, particularly when there are relative caregivers, that the it's not, childcare is not anticipated or expected as it would be for parents who kind of can plan, because oftentimes the situation becomes urgent or imminent when they're not expecting it.
Yes, and there also may be some ways that we could work with Head Start and school readiness and child daycare to have sort of some kind of priority for when family and community as foster care.
Yeah, I'll just note that, children in foster care are categorically eligible for early Head Start service. So, yeah.
That's great. That's great. So the information systems and making sure people know that could be part of our recommendation. Others? Yes, Ava.
Do you want us to hit all three
Well,
We're starting with one, but I think you can hit anyone you want. We'll open it up.
Okay, I'm gonna go out of order, but it's all interconnected here. So for the last 2 weeks, in our phone calls through Childcare for Connecticut's Future and also CSCA, the Child Care Union, we've been making sure that the turnout has been as high as possible to the listening sessions for the Blue Room panel. In those turnout calls, it's really hard to convey a long-term plan, talking to parents and providers, because of the conversation of the wait list, you know, what happens in the now. With the feedback that I've gotten, it's given me a lot of thought for, you know, what recommendations resonate with us, and then going and tying into what recommendations would we need clarification. The clarification would be how the SMI conversation will impact parents and providers long-term. And then in what resonates, it seems to me from those phone calls, there's a lot of questions of longevity and costing. From the perspective of parent and provider conversations is, where do I fall in? Does the state have a plan that's going to work for me long-term? Or is this going to be a fix that once you fix it, you know, one of my child who might be a toddler at the time is good to go. And then if I have another child, forget about it. Like that's the concern for a long-term plan. And then the clarification part of it from the perspective of being the policy end of it, How are you gonna build, into that plan, the necessary steps to fund said plan? And if I'm gonna add in number 3, because you wanna add in a positive here, I'm very excited to see that you're really tackling workforce development and tackling really, fixing how parents and providers access childcare in the home.
Thank you so much for that. I think that and you can correct me, just so folks who are taking notes get it. I think one of your questions is, if you expand to 100% of SMI, what does that do to the wait list? And what does that mean for families?
That's correct, and for those who are looking at the document, that's a reference point of goal objective 2.8. You want to be specific?
Yeah, so I think that's an important thing to tackle. We do have news that because of some drops in enrollment, we are clearing the wait list this week, which we talked about, and it'll take a little while, but there will be no wait list right at this moment. We're still going to have the enrollment management system that's not going away, but everybody waiting now will be invited to apply to Care for Kids. But to your point, the wait list has an impact. And we also need to analyze, we had another comment this week around analyzing the wait list relative to equity. That families on the wait list who can afford to pay their provider while they're on the wait list get into programs and take spaces. People that go on the wait list and can't afford to pay the provider who wait to come off the wait list, by the time they get there, the spot is gone. And so there's been some shift in the economics of who's enrolled in our programs in some of our lower income communities. So that has come up this week. So that's where the wait list and the equity and the funding. So when you increase SMI, the state median income to 100%, right now the state's working with families. Families are eligible up to 60% of the state median income. If you go to 100%, it makes a lot more families eligible. So that has an impact on the system. And if you have a lot more families eligible and a certain amount of funding, what does that mean about the wait list? And thus the second child, how will my second child get in, or how long will their wait list be? And so the panel needs to think about all these parts of the system. You know, if you move in this direction, what's the impact on equity, or what's the impact on the funding? The wait list or enrollment management tool is an important tool to try to manage to the budget. And also, it's been important when we make policy changes. Just as an example, because I know nobody really wants a wait list, but Holly will remember, like when I was in the legislature, we kept trying to add workforce development to Care for Kids. Let parents get Care for Kids if they're in college or higher ed. And then the fiscal note was always like $40 million. And then during COVID, this was a priority to governors, and now we have a group 8, 9, and 10, who we are allowing higher ed in the system, and it really only costs $10 million. Without the wait list, it's sort of hard to say, oh yeah, we'll just add that, because you have no way, once you open it up, of controlling costs, besides opening and closing the programs, which is very destabilizing. So if you just say, oh, we're out of money, Care for Kids is closed, that's what the state needs to do. With enrollment management, like we're doing now, we can manage to the budgeted number and allow for some of these policy changes that we believe are in the state. So there are cabinet members that maybe don't sort of think a lot about Care for Kids and policy changes. So just to say that, and you can see why Ava's point is so well taken, that these things all work together. You can't talk about expanding Care for Kids access without protecting equity and access for others. So appreciate that. That was probably too much, but yes, Karen.
Just a couple of comments. I think to piggyback on what Ava said, I think being able to speak to the need for a dedicated state funding stream for longevity and to make sure that the plan doesn't rely just on federal dollars, because we've seen how that can fluctuate. And then I think the thing for me, the one thing that I would suggest in this report is to somehow call out that compensation is at the root of all of it, right? So there's language in here and there's goals around workforce and compensation, but it really is the number one factor, right? You can create as many spaces as you want, you can't staff it, not gonna matter. You can have parent choice. The parent chooses a center that cannot staff, it doesn't matter, right? So this is really the number one issue and kind of the top level area that in a 5-year plan needs to be number one for 5-year plan.
Yeah, thank you for stressing that, Karen, appreciate that. Others? Anyone online have a hand up? Yeah,
I was just gonna say, and this is not actually something that was, a bullet or an objective under one of the goals, but I think we used through all of the goals in the outline, and you mentioned it briefly, but I think it's important to kind of highlight here. You know, we have an opportunity with all the stakeholders at the table to talk about how we build an agile and responsive system, because that's often how systems such as this, where you have private players and public players with multiple funding streams, how it breaks down over time, and it doesn't have longevity, and it doesn't have the ability for you to reinvest and de-invest and pivot. And so I think that, you know, when we talk about looking at compensation, being equitable and being responsive to parent needs, I do think that as we build it, it needs to be a little bit more nimble. And I think that when you think about things with that perspective, which is not something that government is good at, right? Because decision makers make decisions at a point in time. I think that, you know, some of the concerns around longevity and, you know, what I did today is different than what I'm going to do tomorrow. I think that we can build in some structures that ameliorate some of that churn and anxiety that we see as we go through various, you know, legislative sessions, federal policy changes, workforce issues. It allows us to be a little bit more nimble and proactive. So I think that that's something that was mentioned, but I think would be important to kind of include in that perspective more.
thank you for pointing that out. I think that's a really, really good point. And for those who sort of aren't, sometimes you can say, why can't you just do this with childcare? Well, it's not like public schools, it's not a public system. 70% of the system is completely private. So to Holly's point, how do we make that system responsive and flexible as needs change, and that sort of maximize resources and make sure we're targeting the right audience. Awesome. Okay, any others? Go ahead.
Just in terms of the conversation around flexibility, Head Start, again, is a really great resource as it relates to best practices that are already outlined and the performance standards, and to ensure that we utilize the resources that are available to us, and Head Start being one of them. For example, in Head Start, there's flexibility as it relates to, you can request an application, which is called the change of scope. If you, based on the needs of your community changes. So we do community needs assessments to identify what the needs of our communities are, but as they change, we may also need to make changes as it relates to the types of program options we offer to families, so that we're ensuring that we're serving the needs of the community.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I do think we have to really look at Head Start as a model in many ways. So that's a really, really important point. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next set of objectives. I see our deputy commissioner is here. Elena, do you want me to do this, or you want to do these two? It's totally up to you.
Go ahead.
You sure? Okay. All right. Keep things rolling. Goal 3 is to elevate family and community voice to develop an equitable and responsive system to, Holly and Marcia's point, and Dr. Ferguson made the point yesterday that we need to look to Head Start because they're already doing needs assessment. We don't need to reinvent the wheel to make communities do multiple assessments. So I thought that I really appreciate those points. Make sure that families are valued in the decision-making process. I would say currently a lot of the decision-making process is provider dominated, because providers are organized, they have great advocacy, and we hear a lot from them. So we need to go out of our way to make sure we're balancing that with the needs of families and hearing their voice. And then one of the recommendations is to fund community-informed governance with regional supports that utilize a common needs assessment for equitable and responsive system. I know North Carolina does this. They have a regional system, regional needs assessment, and funding goes to the region, and then the localities have their governance structures and staff, and they work together to distribute those funds with their Smart Start program. So these are family and community voice objectives. And then next slide. This is where the rubber meets the road, is the system and funding objectives. So to have a high quality system, it needs to be appropriately funded, maximizes current resources, supports economically viable program, and is ready for future investment. The first objective there is to simplify our state systems. We don't need 5 totally different state-funded early childhood systems. We can merge and align with federal systems to reduce the complexity for families and state and providers. We also need an assessment of the true cost of care, so we can develop a plan to move the system toward paying the full cost of care. Right now, for Care for Kids, Connecticut uses a market rate approach, and we know the market is suppressed by what parents can pay, so what the market rate is isn't necessarily what it costs to provide care. The next is to maximize the existing partnerships and strengthen programs through them to improve enrollment. So we know that programs aren't full enrollment, and when they are at full enrollment, their fiscal situation and stability is much better, but we don't do enough to support their business practices and enrollment practices. Even the statewide enrollment system could give programs information about families looking for childcare to help them with enrollment. And that comes down to the data and information systems need to be improved. We need a flexible fiscal model that stages investments over 5 years. And then to Karen's point earlier, identifying a funding streams that could be dedicated to early childhood, which is what's been happening in other states like New Mexico, Vermont, Massachusetts, New York, and just sort of seeing what's happening in other states. Minnesota's in the midst of this. They're sort of at the same phase we are, trying to say what is a potential funding stream that could support early childhood in a sustainable way. So go to the questions again now. Same questions, but new goals. What resonates with you? Are there any recommendations that need clarification? And which recommendations are you most excited about? We'll go with this format of whatever of those questions works. If we can start our conversation so we can get feedback from the town. Lieutenant Governor, did you have some? Sorry, I'm talking. You're thinking.
It looks like Carolyn Austin's hand is up on Zoom.
All right, Carolyn.
Hi, good morning, everyone. So I'm excited because when I listen, as a parent, as a community member, as a parent leader, at first, you're going through everything and I'm thinking, okay, so there's that, and those things I could speak to. But then when I went forward and saw the community engagement aspect of it and the parent engagement aspect. The whole time that I'm listening, I'm thinking, there's a few family centers, not family centers, I'm sorry, daycare centers right by me, and some young girls in my building. And I've attempted to have this sort of a conversation about how they're experiencing childcare, what their needs are, and just different families, actually. And I just think about how many families are not privy, excuse me, to this conversation, or just even being able to get their frustrations or their thoughts out there. And so to see that there's going to be more input, or my recommendation, way more input going to the daycare centers, because these inner city centers, I'm in Hartford, they're not really privy to this. They don't know. They just don't have a place to go to where they feel that they can voice their opinions or feelings. And so definitely including them in this process and getting their input and getting their feedback is so, so important. And then my mind is all over the place because I'm thinking there's warehouses that a lot of them get jobs in, or even the manufacturing industry is hiring more women and having these classes, and some are complaining because they can't get the childcare for the classes, or when they get the jobs, the times are not flexible for their childcare. And so finding a way to partner with the businesses so that they can provide some sort of childcare or money towards childcare, or just incentivizing that would be the word, incentivizing childcare around the businesses, like these warehouses, are things that I'm thinking about. And so all of that really excites me. And I can't speak to exactly where it falls in, but I think about the quiet corners that their voices are unheard. I think about some of the parents here that, they're not sure where they can go. And so having more of these conversations before completely being, done and everything being put in and submitted, I think is extremely important. But I commend all the work that's being done so far. This is good. It's a good start. So, and I also think, I'm sorry, one more thing. I think about the community cafes I was a part of actually recently, and I just wish that there was a way to, I don't know what it would be, funding or whatever, just get more people in those community cafe meetings to get more of the information out there. I think it's just so important. Those things make me buzz. So thank you.
You just reminded me of this fantastic program that I visited in New Haven yesterday, and it was the brainchild of a woman-owned manufacturing company CEO, of Marsha LaFemina, and she decided that in order to find more available workers, and she found, by the way, that women do a really great job in manufacturing because they're detail oriented, they're organized, they can multitask, right? All the things that we know. And she decided that the way she could attract more women to her firm was to have the hours be between 9 and 2, because then the women could drop off kids at childcare and then be home when they got off the bus, or she could drop them off at school, whatever. And that she was able to attract lots of women to her firm. So as a result, she created this training program for community members in New Haven, both men and women. And of course, the first cohort, this is so strange, but it actually ended up being all men in the training program, but they offer childcare to those men or to women who would participate in the program, to your point about having all of the childcare on site. So I just thought I'd throw that out there because I just thought that was such an innovative idea. Employers, if they want to get good people, change the hours so that, especially if your kids are in school, that you can have better access to great employees, especially women.
Well, I rejected that, and I think it speaks to, what's important to the governor too, is that business has a place here at this table, and how can business adapt to help families with childcare and to support childcare in their community. So I think it's really, really fitting. And I think that's like just brilliant. Just change your schedule, because the just-in-time scheduling of retail makes it very hard for parents to plan childcare and things like that. So, all right, other hands or comments? Needs to. Tom?
I just think it's another way of kind of framing the whole, flexibility conversation, but I think, one of the positive things about the pandemic, there were positive things, is that, it reiterated the need to break down the silos between agencies, because there's lots of these listening sessions that happen and have been happening for a long period of time. But we formalized the expectation that agencies would start working together, and that communities would interface in a more meaningful way with state government, and the state government would be a better communicator of what we had to offer and could offer and how we wanted the feedback to function. And so I think that, this something that is important in this work is understanding that there could be partners out there that aren't tapped yet. So like, I know we have the lab schools, but higher education is at very profound inflection point. K through 12 is going through its own, metamorphosis. And so it offers opportunities to create links and communication and connections, and to break down barriers where we can say, hey, let's leverage and create this funding source to solve this problem, so that we can alleviate pressure over here and we work on it in this way. So I think, when we talk about systems and all of that, and listening to the voice, that what we're defining as a community needs to be a little bit more diverse than the family, the provider, the state organization, the federal institution. Yeah, because I think about businesses and transportation partners. I know we have the Head Start housing pilot, things like that stabilize the family, so that when we look at the core recipient of the service, the kiddo, like that first part of your rainbow, I think we have the ability to really impact that.
And I do think that we work to be more explicit about those partnerships, and like OPM is raising it, the lieutenant governor is raising it, the governor is raising it. We're getting very clear signals that we need to make sure we're sort of leveraging existing state assets and relationships. And we have just signed a contract with CSU. I'm sure you saw it, probably came across your desk, to try to be more collaborative, to improve the lab schools, to also to have them be more flexible for childcare providers who can't necessarily make their way to campus 2 nights a week, especially family childcare providers, because a lot of them do care that, you get to a 4:30 to 5 class, and parents are at 6 o'clock. So they have been really good collaborators at CSU. The president said to me, just call if you have any problem, if things aren't moving fast enough. We want to be at the table, and it's been such a great attitude that we really appreciate at OEC. And I have called, and we were able to move things more quickly. So other reactions or feedback, Ava?
So this reaction is not of my own, and I know you've heard it, Commissioner. I just wanted to put it on the record. The idea from Alex Shavonian and of course others of being nimble and flexible and collaborative with resources the state has available to them through connections with nonprofits for housing and other creative ways to maximize the resources that exist to help a provider and an educator that might not be the traditional ideas. So if the state of Connecticut doesn't have the accessibility to give gobs of money over, that's not always an option. Well, there's creative ways to tap into health insurance, tap into housing, to make sure that the workforce is supported that way.
Thank you. I guess it's really important reminders. It is about compensation, but one of Alex's ideas for folks that weren't there yesterday is that any way to relieve operating expenses on programs helps them pay better salaries. And so whether that's helping their employees get health care or even helping reduce their debt load if they have a mortgage, sort of one-time ways to reduce long-term costs for programs we hadn't really had on our radar. And thank you for raising that here so folks get to hear about that.
For whoever's unfamiliar, Alex Giovanni is the owner and operator of the Friend Center. She has a handful of childcare centers in New Haven, and she has been instituting for some time housing opportunities for her staff. Don't ask me how she did it. It was a lot of work. She partnered with nonprofits and organizations so that her staff doesn't have to pay a dime. A certain group of her staff doesn't have to pay a dime for housing at all. So that way they have a place to stay. So it's very creative what she's endeavored to do.
Yeah, and the piece that as a longtime nonprofit director, that she's found a way to compensate her staff, but her nonprofit is building equity in housing at the same time. Right, because at the end of the day, at the end of 20, 30 years, the nonprofit owns the home. And private schools have done this for years. I know I grew up near the Brunswick School, and little by little, Brunswick bought up homes around Brunswick for their employees, and over time, paid them off. Now, this is not an easy statewide strategy, but to Ava's point, ways that there are options for programs maybe to apply for grant funds or ways that they can reduce their operating costs to improve their salaries is really helpful. So any others before we go on to the next steps? Okay. Next steps. And then we're happy to answer questions about next steps. And I want cabinet members to know that, you can really help us spread the word here and let people know about the other hearings that are coming. So on our website, there's a listing of all the public hearings that maybe we can put that in the chat to Kristen, would be great. But coming up on September 20th, there is a longer form panel meeting. It's going to be in this building or in the Capitol. It's at in this complex somewhere. We're working on the site. And they will be reviewing what will be updated recommendations based on the feedback. They will also be receiving information about the feedback we've received. We'll be taking public feedback on the plan through September 30th. So that sort of allows the public and those following it to see what is presented to the panel and have any last comments or say, you still didn't bring this up, and I've been at every hearing telling you this is important, or you have another chance. And then November 1st will be when we work on finalizing the plan with the panel, and then December, the plan will be brought to the governor. The timing here is meant to give time for policy folks, so people in the lieutenant governor and governor's office can help form this into a legislative package for this session, but it will be a 5-year plan. So there's this session and then next session. And I will say, just to set expectations, what we found during COVID, and we lifted off a whole lot of programs at OEC, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of programs, is it does take time. Like when Holly and I were planning the toddler slots, we're like, oh, we can do this and we'll put this money in this year's budget, but it really does take a year by the time you go to an RFP and you get the additional spaces in place. So we want to make sure the plan is thoughtful, and we were operating in a crisis during COVID. This panel process has given us the chance to stop, look at the system, and make an informed 5-year plan. I will also say I am hopeful about additional federal resources, to Karen's point. We can't count on federal resources necessarily, but we are you know, there is a big push in DC right now, and I know there's a meeting of commissioners that I did not attend this week because I was in a different meeting with legislators last week. Working on the CCBF language at a bipartisan institute, working with staff from senators and Congress people's offices. I know it's a priority of President Biden's. Yeah, and so, and the thing that didn't get done during Build Back Better, so, you know, we have to be ready, if that comes, and we need our own plan as a state, and we need to leverage localities too, so it's gotta be a partnership. So these are the dates, we really made this the whole cabinet meeting because we wanted to make sure we had time to go through the recommendations. There's a form on our website if folks watching at home, maybe aren't on the cabinet or are on the cabinet, have a thought later, just put it on our feedback form on the Blue Ribbon panel part of our website. We'll be going to Norwich this afternoon. You're gonna get there on time now, people. The Lieutenant Governor and I have made it so we're all gonna get there on time for setup, et cetera, but I'm really grateful for the time today. Lieutenant Governor, any closing?
No, just, thank you to all of you for this great work, and, I'm excited to be able to have a plan to present to the legislature. It's gonna be great.
Do anything formal?
We have public comment, and then you mentioned that you also wanted to discuss the suspension and expulsion with the three webinar events. And I
Okay,
put those in the chat.
let's start with, public comment. Sorry about that. I got off the agenda.
Ruth Ann, did you want to come off mute and voice what you put in the chat? I'm happy to read it out loud for you as well, but I think it deserves the.
Why don't you read it, Kristen, for now, and then if she
Sure.
wants to come off and.
Okay. So Ruth Ann Buckner states, what resonated with me was the emphasis on equity and access. I believe that you have effectively incorporated family input into the recommendations. This relates back to the first section. One area that requires greater attention is supporting families pursuing higher education while also affording childcare during their academic journey. I firmly believe that ensuring permanent access to care for kids for these families would be a significant step forward. I regularly encounter families who aspire to earn a degree but are unable to return to school due to lack of childcare options. I would also like to advocate for additional resources to support families who ask for family members to care for their children due to the trust and cost effectiveness associated with this option. Furthermore, I believe that having a more central area that consolidates all childcare resources and services for the different towns would be essential. Providing a pamphlet with OEC resources or a QR code to give families in the hospital after having a baby might be a great way to spread the word about some of these programs. Offering businesses in Connecticut tax incentives might help increase their willingness to offer childcare or subsidies.
So I love that idea of being able to pay family members, and we already have that model. There's a program for family members that take care of seniors who are ill. And it is, you know, the data shows that if you have a family member caring for an older relative, that the outcomes are better. They go to the hospital less, they take their meds, that's, you know, they're able to stay in their homes. And so it's not only cost effective, but the outcomes are better. And so, you know, that's, I think we already have a model for that. Good idea too.
Yeah, thank you for that very much. Thank you, Lieutenant. Anybody else?
I just want to second what Ruth Ann said or thirded about the having childcare, better access to childcare and higher education. I was having a conversation with someone yesterday actually about the two women that started the childcare in BMCC, Borough of Manhattan Community College, when they couldn't have access to childcare. It was just difficult for them. One of them is now a lawyer, an attorney for many, many years. And she had told me a long time ago about how the parents got together and got funding to be able to start this first child care model at the college. And I know that like Capital Community College here has that, but just really increasing that throughout the state, at least the state schools and the community colleges, would be most beneficial. And I was thinking about that. So when I see her comment, I'm thinking, yes. And I know someone else had, I couldn't really hear very well, but I think that that is what one of the comments was leading towards, including state education, higher education, in this conversation. I know that they're part of the conversation already, but just more comments from students attending. So thank you. I'm gonna
Thank you, Caroline. I do want to just make sure people don't get hear the flood warning, and I know there are people traveling from here, but I'm going to ask you to do that with extreme caution, which is what is being recommended. So that if there is if you start to drive, because it might not be raining bad now, just please pull over and make sure you get the safety, because I'm sure you heard what happened in Leominster yesterday. Was it yesterday? 11 inches in 6 hours, right? And so these are challenging times. So I wanted to make sure. Last call for public comment. Okay, then I just have two announcements. One is that September 21st from 1 to 3, OEC is sponsoring a training for providers called Taking a Different Path, Supporting Positive Approaches to Addressing Challenging Behaviors and Early Childhood Programs. You may or may not know, but the suspension and expulsion rate in early childhood is much higher than in public schools. And we're working at OEC to help bring tools to providers to try to help them deal with challenging behavior. So this is a 2-hour event on Zoom. It is September 21st from 1 to 3. And we're joined by Melvette Hill, who's the Associate Director of the Commission of Women, Children, Seniors. And we also have a special message from Dr. Walter Gilliam, who sadly has recently left Connecticut to go to the Buffett Institute in Nebraska, but did groundbreaking research in the area of preschool expulsion and suspension and equity. I mean, really showed significant racial differences in rates of suspension and expulsion. Help us be aware. So we're really excited to have Dr. Gillian with us for that as well. Give a message, a big message. So want you to know that. I'm going to ask Elena to come to the microphone and announce. We also have next week a Bird to 3 event. Do you mind sharing the details of that?
Good morning, everyone. We're really excited that next week on September 19th, there is a celebration celebrating 30 years of Bird to 3. And this is a really historical moment, I think, for the state and for the country, and to really recognize the amazing work of Bird to 3 here in Connecticut. And so the time will be from 3 to 5 p.m. on September 19th. It's going to be at the Connecticut Science Center. And we have information up there on the screen on how to register. And so just a thank you to the partners who are involved in organizing this event, and a big thank you to the OEC Bird to 3 team. We really invite you to be here. This is families, providers are all invited to be a part of this special event celebrating Bird to 3.
Thank you so much. Okay, well, I think that completes our meeting. The next meeting, Kristen, do you have a date for the next meeting? Putting you right on the spot. Vanessa's back. November 8th.
On Zoom.
On Zoom. On Teams, okay, and what time? 1 to 3, November 8th. You have a little break from us. And we will have an update from the Blue Ribbon panel, and we'll also spend a little time there on the kindergarten age and some other policy items. So, and you could feel free to send us if you have a question or want us to cover a topic. Yes, Eva?
I wasn't sure if I can make an announcement here, but I think this is a worthy one. Congresswoman DeLauro is gonna be talking about federal childcare changes, next Monday on the Early Care Connection call at 9:30, and that call is always open to anyone. It never takes any political opinion. We always try to make sure it's neutral, but the Congresswoman is a very dogged champion of childcare. If you want to get the Zoom link, how do you get on there?
Well, we can, you know, ECE lister out there, early childhood lister. And if you want to send us the meeting invite, we can.
I'll do that.
Sinead, can we do that? Yeah, that'd be great. Okay, have a great day, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
And be careful. Caution.
Thank you.